Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive global framework known as the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. If you've ever sifted through United Nations documents, you know they can be incredibly dense. But our goal here is to transform that wealth of information into a crystal clear, dynamic blueprint for our future. We're going to break down exactly what these goals are, where they came from, and how the world actually plans to achieve them. To make sense of this massive initiative, we've broken it down into 4 quick parts. 1. The ultimate to-do list. 2. Decades in the making. 3. Inside the 17 goals. And 4. Tracking global progress. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The ultimate to-do list. Grasping the scale.
So, I've got a question for you right out of the gate, and honestly, no judgment here. Have you ever actually memorized all 17 Sustainable Development Goals? I mean, we've all seen those colorful little square icons on tote bags or corporate reports, right? But grasping the full scope of what these goals actually entail, that's a whole different ballgame.
That number, 17, represents the core goals sitting right at the absolute heart of what the UN calls the 2030 Agenda. And look, these aren't just polite suggestions. We're talking about an urgent, all-hands-on-deck call for action by all countries, developed and developing alike, operating as one massive global partnership. But 17 is honestly just skimming the surface. Beneath those broad, ambitious goals lies this incredibly detailed framework made up of exactly 169 specific, measurable targets. These targets, that's where the rubber meets the road. They provide the concrete metrics we need to turn those lofty global ambitions into actual, actionable realities on the ground. This whole shebang, all 17 goals and 169 targets, is officially wrapped up in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Adopted by all UN member states back in 2015, think of it as our shared blueprint for global peace and prosperity. It's designed not just for us sitting here today, but to make sure both people and the planet can truly thrive well into the future.
Section 2. Decades in the making. The evolution of global policy.
Now, these goals didn't just magically appear out of thin air in 2015. The long road of multilateralism started way back in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio, where more than 178 countries adopted Agenda 21. That was built upon in 2000 with the Millennium Summit. Then jump ahead to 2012 at Rio+20, where member states officially launched the process for a new set of goals. All of this momentum finally culminated in 2015 with the historic adoption of the 2030 Agenda. We are quite literally looking at decades of intense global negotiation distilled into one sequence. The real kicker here is understanding the shift from the old framework to the new one. The previous Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, leaned heavily into reducing extreme poverty by 2015, mostly targeting developing nations. The SDGs, though? A massive evolution. They demand action from literally every country, developed or developing, and they tackle a much wider, intertwined web of issues. I'm talking about bringing things like climate change and sustainable economic growth right to the forefront. And it's absolutely wild to look back and realize what a powerhouse year 2015 was for global policy. It wasn't just the SDGs. In March, we had the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. July brought the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on financing. September delivered the 2030 Agenda itself, and capping it all off in December, the historic Paris Agreement on climate change. It was a year where the international community fundamentally reshaped the rulebook. Section 3. Inside the 17 goals, breaking down the blueprint. So let's look at how this is structured without just reading a robotic list of 17 items. We can group them conceptually. First up, we've got the goals dedicated strictly to foundational human needs and equality. Goals 1 and 2 tackle poverty and hunger head-on. Goals 3 and 4 focus on the vital human infrastructure of health and education. And then goals 5 and 10 are laser-focused on equality, meaning both gender equality and shrinking the broader inequalities within and among nations. Okay, so once those foundational needs are met, you need sustainable systems, right? That brings us to prosperity and industry. We're looking at Goal 8 for inclusive economic growth and decent work. Then Goals 9 and 11, which focus on resilient infrastructure, innovation, and building sustainable cities. And crucially, we have Goals 12 and 7, ensuring our consumption patterns and energy grids are actually clean and sustainable for the long haul.
Finally, we've got the overarching goals that protect our planet's resources and set up the governance to keep everything running smoothly. There's a huge environmental push here with goals 13, 14, 15, and 6, protecting our climate, oceans, terrestrial ecosystems, and managing water. Then there's goal 16, all about building peaceful societies and strong justice institutions. And maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, Goals 17. That's the glue. It's about revitalizing the global partnerships required to actually pull this whole thing off.
You know, the real defining genius of these 17 goals is how completely interconnected they are. This isn't some a la carte menu where a country can just pick their favorite issue and ignore the rest. You absolutely cannot eradicate poverty without simultaneously tackling health, education, and climate change. If you fail in one area, you compromise the entire blueprint. They are deeply structurally bound together.
Section 4. Tracking global progress, accountability, and data.
So you might be wondering, how on earth does the UN actually track 169 targets across nearly 200 countries? Well, accountability follows a super clear three-step cycle. Step 1 happens right on the ground. Data is rigorously gathered by national statistical systems and compiled regionally. Step 2, all that raw data flows upward and gets synthesized into a massive annual SDG progress report by the UN Secretary General. And Step 3, that report is heavily scrutinized and reviewed by the high-level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, which acts as the main hub for follow-up.
And speaking of all that data flow, it's a completely continuous, living process. As of today, July 30, 2026, the UN has already dropped the advanced, unedited version of the latest 2026 progress report. They are constantly crunching these numbers to figure out exactly where member states are falling behind and where they're picking up speed. Now, it's really important to distinguish between the two major tracking reports out there. The annual SDG Progress Report is pumped out every single year by the Secretary General, strictly based on that national statistical data we just mentioned. But on the flip side, you have the Global Sustainable Development Report. That one is quadrennial, meaning it only comes out every 4 years, and it's uniquely drafted by an independent group of scientists. Their whole job is to provide completely objective, scientific analysis to inform the massive UN review deliberations at the General Assembly.
And making all of this tracking, synthesis, and advocacy possible behind the scenes, that's the DSDG, the Division for Sustainable Development Goals. Housed within the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, they are literally the engine room of this operation. They provide the substantive support, they help build capacity in developing nations, and they evaluate the UN's system-wide implementation to make the 2030 Agenda an actual reality.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a powerful thought straight from the source material. It says, broad ownership of the SDGs must translate into a strong commitment by all stakeholders to implement the global goals. Look, the UN can track the data and governments can sign all the treaties they want, but a stakeholder means everyone. It means businesses, local communities, and individuals. Achieving these goals isn't just the UN's job. So the question we really have to ask ourselves is, what is your role as a stakeholder in committing to humanity's shared blueprint?